Good morning, my name is José Manuel Romero, and this paper is called "Mi casa es tu casa: The Reception of David Foster Wallace's La Broma Infinita in Spain." At the beginning of the new millennium in Spain, although a large number of generations and literary movements coexisted, the Spanish narrative was essentially dominated by a generation of novelists who began their work in the 80s. These were authors who wrote after the death of Francisco Franco and the establishment of democracy. Authors such as Juan José Millás, Javier Marías, Antonio Muñoz Molina, or Enrique Villamatas, to name just a few. They were the literary giants under whose shade the literatures of the current generation and later the Nocilla were rising. This is the context in which David Foster Wallace's work is introduced in Spain. At the end of the 90s, shortly after joining Grijalbo Mondadori publishing house, editor Claudio López de la Madrid discovers the work of David Wallace through Infinite Jest, which had just been published in the USA and whose manuscript circulated then in the Spanish publishing world. López de la Madrid, who had previously been living in New York, brought back to Spain the idea of introducing in our country the new generation of American authors of that time. Wallace's work fitted perfectly into this project, and from the moment the manuscript appeared, López de la Madrid was interested in his purchase for the Spanish market. However, another large publishing group, Plaza y Janés, took over publishing rights before he could. Claudio López de la Madrid, in a personal conversation, explained to me, quote, "Plaza y Janés bought it first, because they paid a lot of money, and what I did was buying a supposedly fun thing I'll never do again, and another book. But I didn't have Infinite Jest. Then, when Grijalbo Mondadori merged with Plaza y Janés and the Random House Mondadori group was created, at that moment the people of Plaza y Janés, which is evidently a commercial house, told me that they weren't going to publish that book, that they did not know why they had bought it in the first place, and that if I paid what they had paid, they would pass it on to me. And then I got that book." End quote. In the end, a supposedly fun thing we'll never do again and Girl with Curious Hair, as well as brief interviews with hideous men, would be published before Infinite Jest due to the translation problems of the novel, which we will discuss later. López de la Madrid's initial idea, the introduction of new American authors in Spain, took shape in 2001 when he created the Next Generation campaign, an ad hoc denomination that has not had much impact in the academic field, and that, in fact, it is part, quote, "of a marketing strategy," end quote, as was literally asserted by David Sedaris, but that efficiently describes the idea of a new American literature, revulsive and relatively unknown in Spain. It is therefore a label created to refer to a group of American authors. Linking this term, Next Generation, with Samuel Cohen's essay, "To Wish to Try to Sing to the Next Generation Infinite Jest History," Cohen states that Infinite Jest thematizes the situation of the literary generation of that time, which he recognizes, quote, "in the middle of history," end quote. In this sense, Mondadori's Next Generation participates in this situation. Its authors try to find their place in the history of literature, and nevertheless, they fail in this search that resembles that of the Crystal Roman. Their literature is not the new model with its messianic resonance. It is neither Barth's revised new syllabus nor Wallace's single and tender literature. Therefore, the Next Generation is not such, not even in Spain. As José Luis Amores, the translator of The Broom of the System, told me, quote, "You cannot forget that works like A Public Burning, J.R. or Gravity's Rainbow are much earlier than Infinite Jest. Grijalbo translated and published Gravity's Rainbow in 1978. Alfaguara did the same with the Recognitions in 1987. In other words, Infinite Jest did not mark, in my opinion, any milestone. Just continued with a tradition, bringing avant-garde literature from outside." End quote. This denomination, Next Generation was associated both with the campaign itself and with the creation of a new publishing line in Grijalbo Mondadori that, together with its authors, would be presented at the Next Generation Literary Congress. The Next Generation were constituted by Michael Chabon, Jonathan Levin, David Sedaris, Jack Palahniuk, David Foster Wallace, Matthew Klang, George Sanders, Richard Powers, Rick Moody, Dennis Johnson, Paul Collins, James Gunn, and Dave Eggers. The Congress took place between May 21st and 23rd, 2002 in Barcelona. Several of the authors included in this Next Generation were invited to the Congress. Wallace, one of the main guests, would decline his invitation due to personal problems. As Javier Calvo conjectures, quote, "The problems in question had to do with his depressions and with an addiction to marijuana that he had developed due to medication issues. Apparently, he was very delicate at that time." End quote. To my question about the reasons for his absence, López de la Madrid answered me in the following way, quote, "Because I guess in those moments, it was a moment in which he told me he would come the next year. He was postponing. He told me that he liked Barcelona a lot, where he had been in the Olympics, it seems to me, or I do not know when he had been. And he had told me that his wife could not come, and in the end he had postponed it and could not come. But I knew from the first moment that he wouldn't come. That's why he did not take me by surprise." Here, by the way, the editor must be confusing the dates, because we know that Wallace got married in 2004. The authors of the Next Generation had a similar age, but they were people with proposals as different as Michael Chabon's, Jonathan Levin's, David Sedaris's, or Jack Palahniuk's. Nothing in common apart from age and being, yes, a Next Generation, after the one of the super-consecrated Roth, Updike, etc. That was a quotation. The editor said in another interview. In general, Spanish literature shows an influence from American literature that is exhibited in Spain with about 5 years of delay. This is true at least of Spanish writers who are not familiar with the English language. Evidently, there are exceptions, such as Germán Sierra, Juan Francisco Ferrer, Robert Juan Cantabella, Agustín Fernández Mayo, or Javier Calvo, all of them bilingual. However, we can assume that the work of some of the authors in the so-called Next Generation remain unknown in our country and for our writers until the moment of their translation. Thus, we believe that for each literary generation in the USA, there is a Spanish counterpoint that develops 5 years later approximately, and that maintains its basic cultural characteristics intact. However, this explanation is not definitive, because as Carlos Sala states, quote, "The history of literature shows that there is only one youth," end quote. Perhaps globalization makes inevitable the appearance of common features in young literature regardless of the time and context. Under this premise, the narrators belonging to the same generation would share specific interests and concerns that they could channel through their fiction. Although what Mondadori called Next Generation is nothing more than an informal group of authors extracted from what Wallace called the three literary camps, this name may be more pragmatic for us than we might think, and in fact, our thesis is that the Next Generation campaign, despite its obvious marketing component, has influenced more than we might think in the Spanish literature panorama of that time, an influence that has its continuity in the present time. Thus, the Spanish Nocilla generation would be the counterpart of Mondadori's Next Generation, which we can call, like Wallace, late modern literature or literature of the three literary camps. In fact, it is the Spanish author and translator Javier Calvo, belonging precisely to the Nocilla generation, responsible for translating several of the authors of this Next Generation, including David Wallace, into Spanish. Perhaps not anecdotally, we point out now that Calvo met his then future wife in the Next Generation campaign, and who is none other than Jonathan Leden's sister, Maya Fay Leden. Mara Leden is, moreover, the English translator of some of the authors in the Nocilla generation, which entails an interesting relationship of inter-influence between both shores of the Atlantic. Thus, the assumption of the translator, quote, "Next generation was a spurious concept, whose maximum utility was to marry me," end quote, would be both true and false. The problem with translation. David Wallace has had 4 translators in Spain so far: Marcelo Cobian Fasce, Javier Calvo, Joan Vilaltella, and José Luis Amores. They have together translated into Spanish almost the whole bibliography of Wallace. I will now make a brief biographical review of each of them. Marcelo Cobian was the first translator of Infinite Jest, whose translation had to be eventually revised by Javier Calvo. Information about Marcelo Cobian is scarce. We know that he was Argentine by birth and that, according to Nora Catelli, he belonged to a first generation of Argentine immigrant translators in Spain. He worked for several Spanish publishers, including Grijalbo. He passed away in 2014 in Buenos Aires. Javier Calvo, as has already been said, is a Spanish author and translator belonging to the Nocilla generation, who has translated authors such as Palahniuk, Daniel Oski, Don DeLillo, J.M. Coetzee, Joan Didion, Dennis Johnson, David Peace, etc. Calvo has a degree in journalism from the Autonomous University of Barcelona. In addition, he studied comparative literature at the Pompeu Fabra University. He is the author of the stories collected in Risas Enlatadas and several novels, among which are El Dios Reflectante or El Jardín Colgante. Calvo is especially important in the process of translating Infinite Jest and Wallace's work in general. In fact, his own work is influenced by Wallace's narrative. See, for example, quote, "The Spanish narrator Javier Calvo has paid tribute to the aforementioned Wallace's story, Little Expressionless Animals, in his book Risas Enlatadas, and uses the procedures cited above, the emulation of television procedures in the narrative," end quote. And, quote, "We have already spoken of Calvo's book. The fact that he is the translator of almost all of Foster Wallace's published work in our country says a lot, and his work is a clear recipient of his thesis. That's why its inclusion here should not surprise us. We noticed in him from the beginning of Risas Enlatadas that critical concern for the medium, and his analysis of it is, by far, the most deep and sustained of all Arrullán's narrative." End quote. The editor and translator of The Broom of the System, José Luis Amores, agrees. Quote, "I suppose that Wallace's work has influenced some Spanish authors, but I think the clearest case is his first translator, Javier Calvo, and specifically his first books. Then he changed the registry, improving it." End quote. The third translator is Joan Vilaltella, responsible for translating everything and more. He has a degree in physics, a degree in mathematics, and a PhD in applied mathematics. He has also translated Neutrino by Frank Close and A Mind of Four Numbers by Barbara Oakley. Finally, José Luis Amores has a degree in business studies. His figure as editor has gained a key importance in Spain in recent years, at least in relation to the publication of North American authors of the last generations, such as William T. Bowman, Robert Hoover, Mark Jett, Daniel Oski, Evan Dara, Noah Cicero, and, of course, David Foster Wallace. Sparked by the reading of a supposedly fun thing I'll never do again, and after immersing himself in the reading of American authors in the line of Wallace, he decided to create his own publishing house, Pálido Fuego. The translation of Wallace's work into Spanish has faced some problems, as we'll be seeing in a moment. Before delving into the case of Infinite Jest, let us briefly review some problematic and anecdotal circumstances surrounding the translation of other of our author's texts. Joan Vilaltella told me in a personal interview that, although there were no significant difficulties in Everything and More's translation process, which would be published in Spain in 2013, there were 2 issues to be highlighted. I quote, "A. When searching for information about Wallace, I realized that the biographical information on the back cover of the original book wasn't up to date, as it did not mention the tragic death of the author. This is what I communicated to the publisher, in case they wanted to modify the content of the back cover. And B, I had to notify that in the end there was a blunder in explanations about infinity and that as a mathematician I would be forced to do something about it. My intention was to correct the error and add an explanatory translator's note. End quote. Another interesting case is that of Datum Centurio, the text collected in brief interviews with hideous men, whose title is translated by Javier Calvo in the Spanish edition as Rotulus Praeteritus. The reason is unknown to me. Finally, I must highlight the case of a radically condensed history of post-industrial life, whose translation, naturally, does not respect the syllabic peculiarities that Berne exposes in Infinite Jest, A Reader's Guide. Let us finally delve into the specific case of Infinite Jest. Given the magnitude and complexity of the novel, its translation into any language must necessarily be problematic. Of course, it's a very complex problem. This was a quotation. Of course, it's a very complex problem. What should a French-Canadian speaking very bad sound like in German translation? End quote, said the German translator Ulrich Blumenbach. In the case of Spain, the translation was especially problematic. This translation, initiated by Marcelo Cobian shortly after the purchase of publication rights, was repeatedly postponed. This is what Javier Calvo says about it. Quote, Claudio's plan was to publish Infinite Jest first, although I think he bought Girl with Curious Hair at the same time to publish it later. But it crashed with the translation. The translator to whom he commissioned the work had many problems. On one occasion, Claudio told me that it took 8 years to complete the translation, although I do not know if it is an exaggeration. In any case, it took many years. While the translator had several nervous breakdowns and was skipping all deadlines, I came to Mondadori myself. While Cobian was stuck with Infinite Jest's translation, Calvo was appointed to translate a supposedly fun thing, Girl with Curious Hair and Brief Interviews, all of which would be published before Infinite Jest. When asking López de la Madrid about Cobian's translation issues, this is what he answered, quote, Then came the problem of the very long translation. I gave the book to Marcelo Cobian for him to translate it. He was a good translator and such, but it was a hellish book, and time was passing by, and the book did not move forward. So at a certain time I had access to what he had translated so far, and it had a lot of problems. It was then when I passed it to Xavi, Javier Calvo, and it was Xavi who got in charge of finishing it, or modifying it, and of remaking it, so to speak. On Cobian's nervous breakdowns, he said, quote, No, let's see, I do not know that. What I do know is that the translation was a little too much for him, or that, yes, he really had health problems. Yes, it's true, he did have health problems. I do not remember if nervous problems, that kind of health problems. It was delayed a lot, and at a certain moment, it was necessary to change the strategy. End quote. This revision of Marcelo Cobian's translation, nevertheless, seems to have been more complex than readers are allowed to see. Javier Calvo himself gives us the key to understand the truth about this revision. In any case, Infinite Jest finally came out. The translation was considered problematic, so that in the summer of 2002, a team of people, of which I was part, was put to work on it. A more or less thorough review was made, although in my opinion, the base of the translation could not be changed. It was rather a correction made by many people, not a retranslation. Infinite Jest finally came out in Spain, I think that in 2003, 7 or 8 years after the original. That is, it is likely that Claudio's term of 8 years is more or less exact. End quote. La Broma Infinita was finally published in November 2002. Infinite Jest may not have meant a change of orientation in Spanish literature of recent decades. It may not have been a visionary book for us, already aware of the great American maximalists. What is undoubted, however, is that it has had its repercussion in the literature of a few, in particular readers and writers who have seen in Wallace's great novel the reflection of an era, of a sensibility with which they felt identified and that had not yet managed to glimpse in the recent Spanish literature. Infinite Jest edition was almost as problematic in Spain as it was in the USA, although because of different reasons. Nonetheless, the novel has proven to be a safe value not only for the Spanish publishing market, but also for these Mediterranean human beings, as needed as any others of the proverbial CPR of Wallace's literature. Thank you very much.